One of my father's retirement hobbies has been researching the history of our family. So last year for his birthday, my siblings and I got him a subscription to Ancestry.com to feed his new research interest. He's clearly gotten the most out of his gift because this year he gave each of us books that he had put together over an inch thick, all about our family genealogy. It's amazing what you can do when you're retired. It was pretty cool to go through and see the different generations and to think about where we had come from. Though I grew up in Minnesota, I actually have generations of family that lived right here in New Hampshire. And of course, each branch of the family had a story, or at least some moment of arrival here in the United States. For any one of us who is not 100% Native American, our family story contains a moment, or perhaps many moments, of arrival here in this country. For some, that arrival was forced. For others, it was a choice. For others, it was somewhere in between those two. For some, it was hundreds of years ago, and for others, it was within their own lifetime. This narrative of immigration is deeply a part of our country's larger narrative. And it's a part of the story that's often romanticized. When we think about the immigrant story, the first thing that comes to mind is often a story of possibility and opportunity. The United States has been put up on this pedestal, the ultimate place to come and find success and prosperity. Early immigrants thought of this as the land of milk and honey spoken about in the Bible. And there was a sense that you could be anything you wanted to be if you just came to the United States. There has also been a romanticized narrative of welcome that has been woven throughout the history of this country. Emma Lazarus's poem, The New Colossus, etched in the Statue of Liberty in New York, speaks to this narrative. She writes, and these words are familiar, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to be free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, the tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door." Coming to the United States has often been imagined as this coming through a golden door that welcomed all. Unfortunately, both the history and the current reality of our immigration system is very different from this romanticized narrative of welcome and opportunity. These past couple of weeks, people across the country have been up in arms about our president's less than tasteful comments about what kind of countries some immigrants come from. Do you know the one I'm talking about? I'm not going to say it. As I've been watching the reactions to that comment, I've been wondering if our anger is a little misplaced. While I would agree that the comment was blatantly racist and inappropriate, I think it's important to acknowledge that it was also a pretty accurate statement about the intention of our current immigration system. The truth is that it is not just our president who is racist. It is our entire immigration system. If we are going to be angry, let's be angry about that. The romanticized vision of immigration to the United States has rarely been the reality of what immigrants have experienced. Starting with the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, the laws that have been put in place to determine who does and who does not get to come into this country have, more often than not, been rooted in racism. That Immigration Act of 1882, which is more commonly known now as the Chinese Exclusion Act, was the first law to explicitly ban people of a certain nationality from coming into this country. It was the outcome of years of racial hostility against Chinese Americans, and it set the stage for laws that were passed later on that it put restrictions on people coming in from other countries. Did you know that act wasn't fully repealed until 1942? Even though we might look back now and condemn the Chinese Exclusion Act, it was the beginning of the creation of our modern-day immigration system, a system that routinely privileges white people and discriminates against people of color. We've seen the racism inherent in our immigration systems play out in so many ways, even in just the last 10 years. Many of us probably remember the uproar about Arizona's SB 1070, a law which required police to determine the immigration status of someone arrested or detained when there was reasonable suspicion that they were in the U.S. legally, that they were not in the U.S. legally. So how do you think that reasonable suspicion was determined? Who do you think was asked to present proof of their status in this country? It certainly wasn't people who look or talk like me. Closer to home, there's been the practice of setting up temporary security checkpoints within 100 miles of the border between the U.S. and Canada. This has happened right here in New Hampshire in the last several months. I once experienced one of these checkpoints, driving alone back from Vermont. I stopped as they told me to and rolled down my window, and the officer asked simply if I was a U.S. citizen. I wasn't sure what was happening, so I said yes, and he waved me right on. I certainly had no proof of citizenship in my car or on my car, but it didn't matter because I looked and sounded like I belonged. The blatant racism that shapes our immigration system and enforcement not only flies in the face of what many of us imagine our country to represent, it also goes against our Unitarian Universalist belief in the inherent worth and dignity of every person. The way our immigration laws are written, some people are looked at with more worth than others. Some whole countries are viewed with more worth than others. So it is that Unitarian Universalists have long been advocates for reform of the U.S. immigration system, recognizing that the laws that govern that system are designed to be oppressive and unjust. We UUs have often partnered with other people of faith in this struggle as faith communities of all kinds recognize the ways in which our U.S. immigration system dehumanizes people and separates families. Here in New Hampshire, over the last several months, people of faith from across the state have joined together to create the New Hampshire Immigrant Solidarity Network to respond to recent developments around immigration, both here in New Hampshire and in our larger country. Just in this past year, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, commonly known as ICE, has been detaining individuals and threatening deportation with increased fervor. Immigrants who live here in Nashua and have lived here for years have shared stories about how they are frightened by the stories they hear of and by their own experiences of ICE officials showing up unexpectedly, following people home, and working with our state police to detain individuals who have no prior criminal record. The New Hampshire Immigrant Solidarity Network began to take shape last summer when a group of over 50 Indonesians from Dover most of whom have been living openly in the U.S. for 20 years, went to their regular check-in with ICE and were told to prepare to leave the country. A group of faith leaders and justice organizers from around the state began to hold vigils at the federal building in Manchester each time we knew that the Indonesians would have to check in to offer witness and accompaniment. The vigils were at first monthly, then more often, sometimes multiple times a week, as the Indonesians were given scattered times to come back, and as the group formed relationships with other immigrants who were going through similar ordeals. In September and October, this group of people of faith officially named ourselves the New Hampshire Immigrant Solidarity Network and began to consider more ways to support and advocate for immigrants in our state. To date, over 30 faith communities and 100 individuals have signed on to be a part of this network, including this congregation through our long-standing relationship with the Granite State Organizing Project. If you want to learn more about this Immigrant Solidarity Network, I encourage you to join us in the fellowship room at 11:45 today. Their work has inspired me. Even as I've been discouraged by the stories of immigrants here in New Hampshire and across this country, I have been deeply inspired by the work of so many New Hampshire people of faith over the last several months. Like so many other systems in our country, our U.S. immigration system was built on racism and discrimination. And those original intentions continue to play out in ugly ways today. But we don't have to let that continue. In the past year of working intentionally in this congregation on racial justice, we have learned that racism does not need to be the end of the story, right? We can be a part of creating a new story, a new narrative, one in which our country is truly welcoming and truly embraces the beautiful and sacred diversity that immigrants have brought and continue to bring to this country. We can set a new intention for our country's immigration system, rooted not in racism and fear, but instead in justice and love. May we make it so, may it be so.